Coming up on Network Africa. Opposition members in South Africa want the coronavirus lockdown reimposed in the country. International flights are set to resume in Cote d'Ivoire. Plus, international and regional leaders of the West African Sahel region agree to intensify a military campaign against jihadists. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Layo Adegoke. We begin here in Nigeria, where the Lagos State Governor, Mr. Babajide Sanwo-Olu, has unveiled 5,000 transistor radios for public school students to continue to have access to education despite the COVID-19 pandemic. Governor Sanwo-Olu commended the Committee of Wives of Lagos State Officials, COWSLO, who donated the e-learning device 5,000 face masks to the Ministry of Education, assuring the students that the equipment will be distributed across the state.
What Council is donating this morning is to improve and enhance the learning capability of the children. And so we're indeed excited that they've been able to put this together for them. I hear that this is the first batch. Another batch will come in. So you know, this is the new norm. We need to adapt with the new reality of where we find ourselves. And so this is part of adaptability, and innovation has to come to learning. And so I want to commission this and put it to use with the benefit of all our children in the public schools. What we're doing now is, as much as possible, learning can be done, off-site. So it's just something for them to also get themselves busy, have a tool, have an app, have a phone, have a radio, whatever it means, you just need to use to communicate, right? Such that one has agreed time, in the comfort of your learning environment, you can tune, you can listen, you can take your notes, you can interact, you can be in tune. You understand? So this is reality.
Members of the opposition party in South Africa want the coronavirus lockdown reimposed in the country. The Economic Freedom Fighters Party has called for a return to the strict level 5 lockdown in the country as coronavirus cases continue to rise. The party says the only way to prevent further spread is for people to stay home, and the government reinstates all lockdown restrictions that were in place before easing started. The party, in a statement, said the country's healthcare system will not be able to cope with the rising number of infections. South Africa's cases of coronavirus rose to over 151,000 on Tuesday, with the deaths at 2,657. The country has been enforcing a phased easing of restrictions and has reopened schools, with cases now being reported among learners and teachers. In neighboring Zimbabwe, it has announced it will partially reopen its tourism industry, one of the sectors worst affected by a 3-month-long lockdown. Restaurants were previously only allowed to serve takeaways, but now they will be allowed to serve sit-in customers, but at only half of their licensed capacity. National parks and local safaris and hunting operations are also allowed to reopen. Zimbabwe's economy relies heavily on international tourism. The sector had been forced to close due to the coronavirus, with borders remaining closed except for returning residents. The country has recorded 574 cases of COVID-19 so far. We have joining us now Nigel Yamutumbu, a Zimbabwean journalist, to give us more updates from the country. Hello, Nigel. Thank you for speaking to us on the program.
Yes, it's a pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Now that the tourism sector is partially reopening, how do stakeholders plan on reviving the industry as the borders are still shut?
Well, the obvious relaxation of the national lockdown rules in Zimbabwe have obviously been welcomed by stakeholders who at least were not really affected as in other industries. At least in the food industry, wherein they would still be allowed to sell takeaways and so forth. But obviously, the relaxation makes it a bit better. The only a bit of a challenge is that the country relies not so much on local tourism, but on international visitors. And with the borders still closed, yes, this relaxation could potentially upscale some economic activity within the tourism industry, but the scale will remain significantly down, particularly this period of July, where it's the peak of the Victoria Falls. So yes, it's welcome, but still a far cry of what the country actually needs in terms of the tourism industry.
Yeah, and Zimbabwe has under 600 cases, which is one of the lowest on the continent, but there's still some form of lockdown. What is the plight of other industries, especially education and entertainment?
Entertainment is really the most hit per se. Yes, there's been some innovations around online concerts. There's been some form of relief that artists have been trying to come up with, or entertainment joints have been trying to find creative, innovative ways of surviving under this lockdown. But the education sector has also, by the same token, been affected. Yes, there is this online education going, online classes. The June national examinations for ordinary and advanced level have commenced, and the examination classes, including of tertiary institutions, will be going back in July to their respective learning institutions. But still, it has really impacted negatively on the operations of these learning institutions. There's online schooling. Not all students can afford the internet. We still have access issues in the country, and we also have issues around availability of the internet services themselves. So in terms of even other essential sectors, including agriculture, which the country's a main economic hub through exporting tobacco, has also really been affected, because due to this COVID-19 pandemic, very few countries are importing from Zimbabwe. So it's really tough times, and yes, the cases are still low, but the impact on the economy is really high.
Indeed, these are tough times. Thank you, Nigel Yamutumbu, Zimbabwean journalist, joining us from Harare.
My pleasure.
As with many others around the globe, Egyptian taxi drivers are adapting to new life under the coronavirus pandemic. In curbing the spread of the virus, some of them are adding plastic shields between passengers, while others are being more generous by giving free rides to medical staff.
As taxi drivers adapt to the coronavirus in Egypt, some protect themselves and their customers by installing a plastic shield inside the car, while others give back to the community by offering free taxi rides to medical staff. Taxi driver Saeed Mahmood is wary of how easily the coronavirus could spread inside small spaces such as cars, yet says he cannot stop working because it is his only means of making a living. In order to not only protect himself but also others, Mahmood installed a plastic shield inside his taxi, separating him from passengers.
You cannot identify those that are infected, and those who are infected cannot identify themselves. Even you can infect anyone riding with you. I therefore decided to isolate myself from the customer. I cannot tell the customer not to ride with me because of coronavirus. This is how I make a living. This is how I protect myself and anyone else riding with me.
His customer, Mohammed Zari, viewed the initiative as a positive move, suggesting that it should be applied nationwide by law. Another taxi driver, Mahmoud Abdel Gawad, is trying to help fight the new coronavirus in the way he can, namely by giving free rides to medical staff.
My love for my country is what drove me to doing this. These doctors have always served us. We must also serve them in some way.
Abdel Gawad has signs on each windshield in Arabic reading, "Driving the White Army for free." The Arab world's most populous country has so far recorded 46,289 confirmed cases and 1,672 deaths.
While the reopening of air borders is looming, many uncertainties remain about when air traffic will return to normal to and fro the continent. However, Cote d'Ivoire is resuming its international flights. The national carrier Air Cote d'Ivoire resumed domestic flights last month thanks to a government bailout following a 3-month suspension due to the pandemic. As expected, boarding and preparations are more complicated than before, with, among other COVID-19 precautionary measures. Without state help, the airline that operates in one of West Africa's busiest hubs would not have recovered after grounding its planes for 3 months because of COVID-19 restrictions. All right, we'll have more on the reopening in Cote d'Ivoire, but in the meantime, with the alarming numbers emerging from this pandemic, some climbs still believe it's a hoax. But this Congolese artist is using her writing on the wall murals to counter the COVID-19 denial. Well, still ahead on the program. We have more on Network Africa, including talking about the diplomatic ties brewing with Taiwan and Somaliland. Please stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. Priska Tankwe is one of several top Fine Arts Academy artists in Kinshasa who paints the walls of a major avenue. But she has a message on how to fight COVID, the hope of breaking through a wave of denial about the virus.
It took 2 weeks for 10 artists to paint 12 murals on the walls of Kinshasa's Academy of Fine Arts in Kinshasa, part of a campaign to illustrate the dangers of the coronavirus in a city of 12 million people where disbelief about COVID-19 prevails. The painters are students and former students of the Academy who painted the walls of the institution on a main arterial road that gets a lot of traffic. Priska Tankwe, one of the artists, chose to draw on traditional African figures, statuettes that are part of the Congolese culture, to help people identify more closely with the message.
Here, for example, we have the Kisikundi. It is a statuette which, in fact, when we have a problem, we go and plant a nail. When someone has done us harm, we plant a nail and we try and talk. And in a way, it protects us. This statuette protects us from harm, protects us against anything that can happen to us. So, following logic, by using these connotations, the connotations that are specific to the statuette, I contextualized. I put it in the context of the coronavirus.
Other artists have drawn on religious motifs, whilst others use bright colors to draw people's attention to the basic barrier measures needed to protect against the virus. And one artist focused on the work of the health service staff working every day to disinfect major parts of the city.
Some children came by and said, "Look, the ancestor wears a mask, so it means that I also want." That is the main message, the message of protection. And when you get that kind of feedback from the youngest, I believe it means the message has gotten through.
Denial of the virus is prevalent amongst the most vulnerable in a country where the political elite is perceived as corrupt and untrustworthy. On Sunday, June the 28th, DRC had 6,827 cases and 158 deaths, with Kinshasa recording the highest number of cases. The neighborhood of Gombe, close to the Avenue 24 where the murals were painted, was under lockdown for months until Monday, June the 29th, when authorities said they will lift the confinement measures.
International and regional leaders of the West African Sahel have agreed to intensify a military campaign against jihadists in the region. The decision follows a one-day summit hosted in Nouakchott, the Mauritanian capital, attended by the presidents of Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania and Niger, as well as France and Spain. The leaders vowed to take stock of a more aggressive strategy in the Sahel, decided in January after a string of setbacks crowned by the loss of 13 French soldiers in a helicopter crash. Militant attacks in the region have increased over the last 2 years, especially in the border regions of Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali, where local authorities have been overrun. Well, security expert Chidi Wanu joins us now to speak more on this. Hello, Chidi. Thank you for speaking to us on Network Africa.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
This summit is the latest action by these leaders to curtail the growing insecurity in the Sahel. What are your thoughts on this meeting?
Well, it's kind of comes at an interesting time because we're at a crossroads in many different things. So this year is obviously a slightly propitious year in that we've got the American election, which could either see a continuation of the current, kind of internal American dysfunction or a change in their foreign policy. You've also got Brexit, in which the United Kingdom is leaving the EU, as well as within Africa itself. We've got various elections coming up next year, and then we've got the all-encompassing COVID-19 pandemic, which has put a damper on so many different things. In terms of the Sahel specifically, there's several other things that are interesting that are happening. So Britain will be joining the UN mission, sending out a small task force to join us on a small combat mission. There is a new EU Special Forces initiative, which is joining in. So this is a decision point per se, where all of these external powers are coming to have an effect in the Sahel, in Mali, etc. And it's time, for what they're trying to do essentially is say, what's the African kind of perspective? How are they going to join in, and what's their view on it?
Yeah, and can we say so far there has been any progress from previous meetings?
That's a very interesting question. It's difficult to say that whether there's been progress, and it would depend on how you define progress. There's been, updates or things that have gone well. So, for example, the killing of Drukdel, the commander of JNIM, and several other people who've been eliminated. But these are small tactical victories in the big scheme of things. There's the fight against the jihadists. There's also the ethnic crisis happening. And all of that's wrapped into one, and the political crisis in Mali. So there's a lot of dynamics there in which there needs to be some level of African leadership, some firm African leadership, which will start taking addressing the other issues, the political, the economic, the cultural issues that are underpinning these insurgencies.
And are there other actions to implement, especially by the presidents of these affected countries? Mali, for instance, the citizens have been clamoring for the resignation of Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. What other things can their presidents do?
Well, I mean, other than resigning, he can implement some necessary reforms. And it's difficult for one to quantify, because there's lots of internal dynamics in terms of the Malian situation. But there are some basic reforms that can be implemented. There can be some investigations into the crimes of war, or alleged war crimes by the security forces. Trying to prevent this ethnic clash between the Dogons, the Fulanis, etc., into continuing and breaking that cycle of violence. addressing corruption concerns and development issues. All of these things might not solve the problem, but it would at least, try kind of divert, attention away from that key political objective of getting him to resign, and then at least give people something to hold on to. So there are lots of internal issues that need to be dealt with by the African participants, as well as, keying into the big kinetic military effort being brought in from outside.
All right, Chidi, just before I let you go, how much more do you think these countries can, harness from the international community? France and Spain was in yesterday's meeting.
So that again, is one of these really, really interesting questions that we need that needs to be kind of thrashed out, because the big problem is that we have the outside world coming in and saying, here you go, we have this, we have the special forces, we have, MINUSMA, we have all of these things, and we're not seeing that African viewpoint. We're not seeing African countries banding together saying, this is what we need X, Y, and Z for you to provide for us in order for us to solve this problem. They're very passive, sitting back, waiting for the outsiders to do the work, and then, kind of just latching on and, seeing what's going to happen. So until there's an African initiative, some sort of an African leadership, if it's not going to come from, the regional hegemon of Nigeria, then it has to come from the AU or from another major African power that has investment in the area. If not, it's just going to be a matter of the foreign powers doing whatever they can do. And their main effort is stopping terrorism from leaching up into Europe. And that's not really, chiming with what, the African nations need to do. So there needs to be African leadership for this to move forward.
All right, then, Chidi Nwonu, security expert, thank you so much for speaking to us on Network Africa.
Thank you.
Taiwan and the breakaway African region of Somaliland are establishing representative office in each other's capitals as a diplomatic tug-of-war escalates with Beijing. Taiwan has formal diplomatic ties with just 15 countries because of pressure from China, which considers the island to be its territory with no right to state-to-state ties. In Africa, only Eswatini maintains full diplomatic ties with Taiwan. Taiwan signed the agreement in February with Somaliland, strategically located on the Horn of Africa that's facing water on Yemen, but had not announced it previously. Foreign Minister Joseph Wu said Taiwan's contacts with Somaliland, a self-declared state internationally recognized only as an autonomous region of Somalia, dated back to 2009. And that's where we end Network Africa for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Adegoke.